I'm in septic shock. I'm whiting out. And while I'm awake, they have to put a chest tube in and they drain 4 liters of fluid.
It's like Emmy award winning and you won a regional Emmy and the thing wasn't actually that good because anyone can win a regional Emmy, it seems. And I'm like, am I being too cynical? Because I just threw it all out the window. I was like, I'm not doing any titles. I don't call myself anything because I just hate how scuzzy it all feels.
He's not cheating on you. He's just filming a mayonnaise commercial.
Yeah.
Did you find a good church?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I was like, I did. And then he cheated on his wife. And then the other 2 pastors also were cheating on their wives. So I did, and then I didn't.
I think in Bible stories still a lot of times. You know, it's like deep in my DNA at some point.
His name was like Mr. Long-Suffering, and I'm like, oh, a fruit of the Spirit, how convenient.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Where did that internal capacity to hold that experience come from?
I texted him, and I was like, hey, man, really cool meeting you. Thanks for thinking we can keep going in the process. I think you sent me the wrong link, though. He's like, oh, no, that's it. That's the job. The link they sent me was for Assistant Vice President of Global Brand Creative. And I went back to my physical therapist and I was like, hey, so I did this thing you would have never recommended for me to do, but I think I fixed it.
Hello and welcome to Second Order Change. I'm your host, Evan Borsier, and today we're talking to Colton Williams. Colton is one of the most incredible people I have ever had the good fortune of talking to, and his story is insane. You've already heard a little bit of it, and I don't want to spoil too much, but one of my favorite things about this conversation is that it really facilitates my love for both the dark and the hilarious. And Colton is someone who has an incredible capacity to hold both of those things in his near-death experiences and are laughing about mayonnaise commercials. So you're in for a treat here, and I'm excited. But before we get into that, I want to quickly tell you about one thing, and that is that we're closing in on the holidays, everybody. We're closing in on January 1. We're closing in on stepping into a new year, a new you. And part of stepping into that is deciding what you're going to let go of and deciding what you're going to pull in. And for me, I spent the first 9 years as a professional holding on to doing my own books and my own taxes. I would hire a CPA, but I used QuickBooks and used it is a loose term because I basically didn't touch it for most of the year. And then right around this time of the year, I would start panicking and stuffing money into a bank account because I was paranoid that I was going to owe the IRS a ton of money. I was paranoid that I was going to get audited and have done something wrong because I'm like, how do we write off all these production expenses? How do you write off $100 in peanuts? Should I be buying this equipment? Should I be financing it? Am I doing this correctly? It was an incredibly stressful situation for me. And in 2020, I made the move to finally hire professionals. And those professionals are Core Group. Core Group has changed my entire life. I don't say that lightly. And they are the first people that I would recommend you hire in any creative business venture. If you are looking to do this, the most valuable thing you can do is free up your own time to go do the things that are highly important, highly relevant, that you're highly passionate about. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that taxes and bookkeeping probably aren't one of them. And it can be easy to hold on to it because we don't want to pay someone. But I will say, at least for me, when I signed up, it was costing me around $400 a month, which sounds like a lot of money, but they were taking care of all of the letters I would get from the state and the feds. If something was, hey, we missed this payment, we need you to get quarterlies done. They were having quarterly check-in calls with me to talk about our profit and loss sheets. I was actually getting profit and loss sheets so that then when I had to apply for financing, I had the things that banks were looking for that I had never known how to make. I have a trusted consultant whenever I want to have a conversation about, should I finance this gear? How would I write off this car? What's the best way to move forward right now? And even talking about things like healthcare and investments, they really are an all-in-one partner for figuring out the financial side of your business. So I'm just saying it now. This is the time that we always say we're going to do it. I know if you're anything like me, it's like, I should do this better next year. And we don't. And you can schedule a free discovery call with Core to talk about your situation. The one other quick thing I'll say is that one of the most important things they did was they looked at my books and they said, hey, you really should put yourself on payroll, and that's going to save you a lot of money on taxes. I had all sorts of questions about that because I had heard about it and I was just nervous. I was like, what if I don't have money for payroll that month? Then what happens? What if I make more money than my salary? That's all very solvable. It's a lot simpler than you think. At least it's a lot simpler than I thought it would be. They took care of that. And the first year we made that switch, I saved $15,000 in taxes. So the amount of stress that they took off my plate was impossible to put a dollar value on. Like, my health has gotten better because of that. I lost weight. I became more fit. I had more time to do creative things. I had more time to actually go to the gym and engage in hobbies and with people that I love. And it saves me way more money than it cost me. So this is just my quick plug that I would highly recommend that you check out Core Group. I don't endorse things lightly at this point. I have no interest in being bought out. I have used them and supported them, and I send everyone their way because it really is a game changer, and I would highly recommend that you make that decision, or at least look into it. If it's not right for you, totally get it, but you would be surprised at just how much bandwidth you can free up when you let professionals do the things that you are not great at. The last thing that I want to say before we get into this conversation with Colton is just thank you for listening. Thank you for telling friends. Thank you for leaving a comment or a rating on your podcast platform. Thank you for engaging with the clips on social media, because that is part of how we get people to hear these conversations and hopefully incite their own irreversible journey into facing their fears and becoming themselves. So if you have not yet done that, I will calmly and respectfully say it would mean the world if you can just take a second to pause this, leave a rating, leave a comment wherever you're at. If you're on YouTube, comment and subscribe. And if you are on your phone, send the link to somebody, 2 people. Say, hey, this is a cool new thing I've been listening to, where we're having really honest conversations about this kind of stuff. It's something that I've always wanted to see in the world, and I'm talking about me, not you. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to put it out there. So thank you in advance. You guys make the world go round. So we're going to get right into it with Colton here as we talk about death and agencies and the wild journey of building a creative career and going through an evangelical deconstruction, being homeschooled. There's a million things in here, and it is so much fun. This conversation is my version of a dream, and I hope that inspires you to live yours.
I don't like production people, really.
Yeah,
just
fair.
from like a culture and posturing, I think is a good way to put it. And you were the least like postured production person I kind of saw as you came back into it. You were just like, it's like you had gone on some insanely religious or spiritual like pilgrimage and came back and had so little to do about cameras, but still so much to do with like camera. Like it was such a hybrid of, I guess, overlap of things I cared about. So yeah, by proxy, kind of watched your life come back to the ether of social media.
That's super cool. That's really funny. Yeah, I've been curious, like, I feel like I'll still run into some people, and even recently I've seen some people like tickle back in. I don't know how Instagram like refines those people. Where like, oh, I remember you from like super secret film group days, and I don't know that I've talked to you in a long time, and so like the catch up is really interesting. But so like back in that 10 years ago phase when you were interacting with like the Vimeo Lens Pro stuff, like, and maybe even before that, like how did you get into this world?
Man, I feel like this isn't an uncommon story, but in like middle school, my family got their first like compact home video camera. It wasn't digital; it was just small. It was like it was high 8. I had literally just been dying to use a video camera, and I was like, oh, there's got to be a way to like edit the footage from this. There wasn't. We had a Windows 95 computer. So I would stack 2 VHS players on top of each other and like edit from one to the other and have my iPod plugged into the red and white aux part and trying to get a soundtrack to mix. You're not editing on the beat for any of that, but that was all well and good. But then I went to 6th grade and showed up and was starting to try to hang out with the skater alternative kids because that's who I resonated with. But I couldn't skateboard. I was too chubby and low center of gravity. I couldn't get it off the ground. So they're like, here, you can ride the skateboard. We have a Firewire mini DV cam. Like, lose your mind, have fun. And so that kind of set me off. I was like, oh, now I can get it in the computer. It's over. And went into the library, got Pinnacle DV Express, put that on the Windows 95 computer, somehow got it to work, and just would edit like little video postcards. I would edit like the skate videos too, but I actually didn't care about that. I was like so unenthused. I was like, we've all seen the X Games, we get it, and y'all are actually terrible. We're in 6th grade. So I just started we'd go on little family trips, and I would steal the kids' digital camera and go film that and make like little video postcards and all that. And that was like what got me just picking up a camera. And
And so that's like fifth,
really
sixth grade. Like when was that in the timeline? How old are you?
Ooh, how old am I? 32, turning 33.
Okay.
Yeah, we're similar in age.
Yeah, I'm 31.
Okay, yeah, so we're similar.
So sixth grade, when is that? I'm so bad because I was homeschooled.
I was like
I never
10.
kept track.
I was homeschooled until sixth grade.
Okay.
So
what is that?
It was
like
also just like a culture
2004-ish?
shock.
Early 2000s?
Yeah, it's definitely post 9/11. It was like 2003, I think.
Okay, gotcha.
So technology really wasn't there yet. There weren't like Facebook. Facebook wasn't a thing. So
Right.
like, there weren't like groups for me to be in. They were like the old piss poor forums with old guys
Yeah.
bitching about like beta cams still.
Yeah.
Like that was all I had access to. But again, like just a toxic curiosity, I think, is what kept it moving forward.
Toxic curiosity.
But I honestly didn't touch a camera professionally until, I guess, like where I got a good exchange of living money for using a camera until I moved to New York.
Okay. And
So
where were you living before that?
So Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky is where like my adolescent years kind of formed.
Okay.
So like high school is when we moved here, which is, I'm home now, which is why, like, this is also not my house or my parents' house. This is my friend's office. But yeah, that was when I was, like I guess I got an agency job kind of right out of the gate. I worked some weird jobs until some friends at an agency in Cincinnati kind of leveraged me in as the sound intern to do all the post-production audio for all the things that they were putting out. So all the whooshes and pops and things for all the little explainer videos. And I worked out of the closet there for 3 years until they started a live action team. And I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to return to this. I really, whatever you can do to transfer me into that team. I know it's like a risk thing for you guys, but let's try it. They did. But then the account managers couldn't sell live action compared to like explainer videos. And they laid off the entire live action team. And that was my last real job until now. That was 10 years ago. I was 22, 23.
Okay. So 10 years ago, you were working in the sound world and everything, and then
tried to do live action, literally got my hand slapped, was like, just kidding. It's not going to work out. The universe kicked me to the ground. I was like, actually, no, not now. And so I went back to literally my graphic design roots, which were the basis of making like MySpace layouts for bands. Like I actually didn't have a graphic design portfolio, so I just like hacked one together that was mostly bullshit. And I ended up getting freelance jobs right as I got laid off. I was like, 3-month contract. The first thing we did was like, I was at an agency in Cincinnati, which is luckily a big kind of weird agency town. We redid like Ford's website and like the car people. And then we did a bunch of mailers for Sam's Club and Walmart, like a bunch of postcards, like the most uninteresting but fruitful stuff. I guess it paid the bills and kept me out of jail.
I'm always so curious. I feel like there's this whole world of like bigger corporate just stuff, whether it's like flyers or print mailers or any of these things that's like, it requires photography, it requires designers, it requires print quality control, it requires copywriters. And I don't know who does all of that, because like that's not a world I've ever touched. But it's almost like when I touched the like corporate training world, we did a big training project during COVID, and it was like, just like safety training is a universe with millions of people in it. So like being in that world, what was that like? Was that sort of their position at that agency you were working with? And were you working as a freelancer with their team, or were you fully running the project, or like what was the nature of that relationship?
Like a hired hand. Like I was like a hired gun designer, pixel pusher.
Okay.
This is back when like, I don't know, I'm sure people listening or watching this will know like Sketch and like some of the weird design software that kind of came in the realm. This was like that era.
Okay.
And so, but yeah, the agencies were pretty big. Like I think what I got exposed to was it's a lot of stuff, and somehow all of these agencies report to like the mothership agency, and at that mothership agency has all of the stuff for Ford, you know, and they're just kind of deciding which little morsels of work to give out to their underling agencies. And so, or like they have the Walmart Sam's Club contract, and the agency I was working for is responsible for all their print and producing all of that, and out of home and direct mail, things like that. Then another agency does their email marketing, and another agency is in charge of their television commercials and the bigger things. Back when omni-channel was just actually a handful of things versus one asset versioned out 60 times for just digital. But yeah, it was a huge exposure thing for me. I think it was the second culture shock I had. It was like going from homeschooled to a public school, huge transition. Going from like a little animation agency in the closet sound designer to like junior peon designer at like an ad agency, doing like the real work, but realizing how non-sexy it is, how much money there is, and how much like bloat and bullshit and like, you can edit this out, but like circle jerking that there is in that world. Like, I
mean, I don't have to edit that out unless you want me to edit it out. I fully agree.
Yeah, no, it's the most insane. Like, it was just like so insular, but like easy to get into. It wasn't exclusive, but it was just it was just weird. And
it's such an odd,
especially in a place like Cincinnati, you have the big fish, little pond syndrome that happens so often that I only really realized was that in hindsight when I moved to New York and was in a big pond where there weren't really any big fish unless you were literally like a Rockefeller. Like you're floating, like you're figuring it out. Everyone, no matter how expensive your rent is and how much you make, you're still kind of all at the same, you're eating the same dollar slice. Like there are equalizers along the way.
Right.
A place in the Midwest, no equalizers. People just kind of running with their egos and not even knowing it's ego, and just making it work, I guess, because the agencies are here. Procter & Gamble's here too, so that's a huge. That's in the backyard. These agencies are also servicing Tide. They're doing all the Tide commercials and all these other things, and it's just weird. And really
that's funny because Tide is always my reference. For whatever reason, whenever I tell my story and about like I'd hit this peak, so to speak, and I was just like on the biggest budget things I'd ever done, and I hated it. Because like I found that for me, I enjoy playing movie, like the process of like having a set, having a team, movie magic, love it. But I have to care, like I care too much about the end thing, and I care about the end user, and I care about all of these other pieces of the puzzle. And for whatever reason, the reference I always make is like I was tired of selling Tide Pods, but I never did a Tide Pod thing. I don't know why that's the like idiom that I use, you know? Like we did Walmart stuff and whatever, but selling Tide Pods is always my little throwaway. I was over that.
It's better than a mayonnaise commercial.
True.
Like that's the other
I want to know
joke people always
who actually shoots mayonnaise commercials, because I'm convinced no one believes them.
I don't know. Yeah, because that's actually a really funny bit. That would be a good sketch.
Like if your whole agency was like your Hellman's mayonnaise commercial agency.
Like I would imagine that even like the film permitting office would be like, no, we get this every week.
Okay,
Like, and they're like, we actually aren't giving you a permit. Like we're not. You need an insurance policy for a mayonnaise commercial.
Yeah. Hey babe, I gotta leave town for a project. Oh, what is? It's a mayonnaise commercial. Yeah, sure. Okay, what are you really doing?
Yeah, it's like he's not cheating on you. He's just filming a mayonnaise commercial.
Yeah. Okay, so we should quickly. I generally don't break the fourth wall, but I feel like this is one of those things that a lot of people are gonna have no clue what the hell we're talking about, because this is such a film industry thing, and I don't know where it comes from originally. But if I had to explain it, and you tell me if this is your understanding of it. There's a thing where you're doing a production and say you're like out on location and people come by and they ask what you're shooting. And this happens all the time. What are you guys working on? Are you guys making a movie? Whatever. And the answer, kind of just to get people to leave you alone because it's boring, is, oh, it's a mayonnaise commercial. And that's like the go-to blow it off, you know, who knows what we're doing. But the answer is always mayonnaise commercial. And so that is the joke now, is that if you were to actually be filming a mayonnaise commercial, no one would believe you, because it's always the thing that you say to just get people to stop asking.
True. That's exactly how I would say it. Yeah, and I guess maybe it probably originated because it's like, what's the blandest thing you could tell someone that would get them to just scram?
Right.
And
Fair.
It's like you could be filming, you could be Chris Nolan doing the Batman and be like, no, it's a mayonnaise commercial.
Yeah.
There just happens to be an explosion.
Yeah. Big pyro mayonnaise commercial.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's like 4 things I wanted to jump back on from what you're talking about a second ago. Bloat, agency, how easy it is to get in and how big it is. But I do want to jump back to the homeschooled thing. So like, what flavor of homeschooled were you? Because I feel like there's like, in my mind, there's like 4 or 5 key flavors that I'm aware of.
Yeah, actually, I want to hear the flavors first, and then I want to pick where I want this to be like a personality quiz.
Okay. So, oh boy. Okay, so I feel like there's a few big ones. One is like, there's kind of the spectrum of like how religiously intense was your homeschooling, because I feel like there were kids who didn't really get that, and there were like, we were definitely the kids who grew up and like, we learned handwriting with Bible verses.
Same. Yeah, that was my flavor.
Like, it was very rolled in. We were also the flavor that was like very sort of like focus on the family, hunting, fishing, manhood, C.S. Lewis,
McGee and Me.
Yeah, Adventures in Odyssey.
Adventures in Odyssey, man. Yeah, that's exactly the flavor. Like, I grew up very evangelical, and I wasn't necessarily homeschooled, I think, because of like the sheltering aspect, because I think that's like, we wouldn't put our kids in public school. Like, that's what I heard from the other like homeschool parents a little bit. Yeah. Was like the public school wasn't good enough. It really wasn't that. The town I was born in was in Colorado, and the hospital was an hour from where we lived. I lived on a dirt road. Like, there was a school, it was K through 12, and my sister went, but like, it was kind of an easier thing for my mom. She was at home and just to homeschool me. And so it was almost a curse of convenience, and the turnkey things available to them at the time through church were all these like curriculums for homeschooling your kids.
Yeah. So were you an Abeka kid, or what flavor of that were you?
I got to Abeka right before I went to a real school. Okay. But like early times, there was these things called PACEs. I forget who made them. It was like, I forget who made it, but they were like little books, basically. Like, you do a PACE every like 2 weeks, and it was like each subject had its own booklet, and so you were going through these workbooks for like each subject, like geography, social studies, and it was, in hindsight, pretty well rounded. But like you said, there were those things where you're like practicing cursive, doing all of Psalms. You know, it's like hold on. And there were always like character-driven like things in the books where it's like the character teaching you geography was like, his name was like Mr. Long Suffering, and I'm like, oh, a fruit of the spirit, how convenient. Yeah. That's crazy.
Dude, totally. That's so funny. Yeah, I remember at one point we were doing Saxon stuff, like we would do Saxon math.
Oh. I feel like that was the smart kid stuff. I was never Saxon level. So this was my problem. I was a smart kid, but I hated it. Like, I hated math sheets. I was the person who would just, like, I would read a lot, but I hated worksheets. I loved testing because I tested really well. I was like, I can crush tests all day long. But I definitely just like resented a lot of the other sort of like busy work of it. Like, it was one of those things where, like, I don't know, kind of carried with me through life, where it's like, I feel like I can take relatively complex things and I get it pretty quickly. And then they're like, and now you're going to do this every day for a month to make sure you get it. And I'm like, dude, I had it on day 3. Like, can we just move on, please? Yeah. But we never really got into Abeka. I think we tried it and I hated it because it was more of just that sort of like more rigid, structured feeling thing. And then my parents separated when I was like 12 or 13. And as that whole sort of like divorce thing progressed, my dad moved more and more out of the picture. My mom got more and more tied up in that, and there were more of us. It kind of just loosened up a lot. And my mom had already been progressing in this sort of like strengths-led, freedom-based learning type thing. And so it just got less and less structured.
And then as I hit sort of like 14, 15, 16, that was when I got a cracked copy of Photoshop through a friend. And at that point, I was just sort of off to the races. So like when I turned 16 was when my mom had to stop reporting anything to the state. And she was just sort of like, you're graduated, do whatever you want. And so I started freelance designing, doing a lot of photo manipulation stuff, going way down the like, I think this was still pre-YouTube, but like early blog, like Behance, Abduzito type world, and like learning all that stuff.
Upon the era of like,
I was like making forum signatures for people on like different like paintball forums I was on and stuff. These like little commissions, doing church posters and stuff. Yeah, dude.
If you've not designed a church brochure at some point, or like the Sunday announcement pamphlet, I don't know if I trust you.
Right, or like a sermon series graphic. I feel like, I don't know. That also depends what flavor of evangelical you are, I guess. But like, I feel like at least the flavor we were in, it's like, well, we're going into this gym series. So can you design us some sort of physical fitness based pun type graphic?
It was always, it was like oh man, I'll never forget. And this is honestly like, these are the reasons I don't go to church, is the knockoff like Reese's shirt.
Oh, the Caruso shirts. Caruso was the company that did all of those, and it was like Call of Duty, but it was like the Lord is calling you into battle, and it's all just like weird brand things.
Like the Great Commission in the Call of Duty font.
Yeah, and you're just like, I was always like, whose job is this? And is this serious? Like, are these guys trolling, or are they serious? I would love to go to that office. I always have this thought too that I'm like, can you imagine? Like, there's a whole infrastructure and an office around Pornhub. Someone is like the IT guy who's like optimizing compression algorithms with their servers. And like, you have to go home for Thanksgiving and everyone's like, what do you do? And he's like, this is what I do. But I always wonder with that too. It's like, you have to sit around and have very serious meetings for like, okay, what good pop culture Bible puns can we come up with for Q4?
It makes me think of like the aesthetic or like the vibe of like in 500 Days of Summer, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's working at that greeting card company. And he's like depressed. And so he just starts writing all these terrible, like I hope you die, like congratulations cards.
Yeah.
And he's like, they're like, oh, your production's really stumbling. You know, it's like, I couldn't think of any good Jesus puns. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I still find myself, I feel like I'm at this point where like there's just still so much of that. I think in Bible stories still a lot of times, you know, it's like deep in my DNA at some point. And so I still find myself coming up with stuff out of that. But at this point, it tends to be kind of ironic and irreverent. Sometimes there's still very serious connections that I make to a lot of those metaphors. But it is very funny now to just be like, because I'll talk to people who didn't grow up that way, and you say something, and they're like, what are you talking about? You know, you're like, this is like a Abraham and Isaac situation, and like, you got to put it on the altar. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? Are you in a cult?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, sorry, guys. This was my whole childhood. You didn't have felt boards where people were teaching you all this stuff?
Dude, oh, visceral. Even the girl I'm dating now, she grew up in church too, just different flavor.
Yeah.
And even now, there'll be times I'll be like, "Oh yeah, classic Cain and Abel scenario."
Yeah,
like you just like, and she's like, "What?" And
yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, this is pretty ingrained in me. And I think I when I kind of left church, I think I fought that really hard. But I realized I wasn't fighting it because I wanted to. I was fighting it because I didn't want to be perceived a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
But then I kind of gave up on that because like, no, this is just kind of part of who I am, and it's actually. I enjoy those parts. I enjoy the metaphor and the story that I inhabit, and also kind of inhabit me in a way. And those are parts of that.
Yeah. You have that mutual relationship with it. I super relate with that. I feel like I kicked it hard for a little while too, especially when I first left, and then started having some just like very tangible experiences where then I came back to it and was like, oh, this actually all resonates a lot more than it did before, but in an entirely different way. It's like your whole lens on it has changed. And that's a tough thing to explain to people who are still in the place that I was when I was 9, you know? But I totally relate to that. I think that's part of where for me in that period of coming back, and like a friend introduced me to Richard Rohr, I got introduced to Jordan Peterson and like started really looking at this like metaphorical, mythological lens and Joseph Campbell. And then I came back and it was like, oh, this all makes so much more sense now. Like for whatever reason, it's like all of that DNA, all the stuff that had been crammed into you, you're like, oh, I can see. It sort of felt like in The Matrix when Neo's like, I know Kung Fu, you're like, oh, I get what they're doing now. And like we were just taught it in an entirely different way than what it seems to be now, you know. And I think that's one of the fascinating things to me about that type of creative content is that the way that I experience it, at least, is that the nature of great art to me is that like you can really perceive it differently at all these different sort of levels of awareness and perspectives. And like it's always true, it's just true in a different way. And so it's like almost a perfect mirror for you back of like what you're projecting into it. And so like that meant a certain thing when I was 6 and being taught things, then it meant a different thing when I was 16, and then now being 31, there's a whole nother lens on how those stories play out. And to your point, how I put them out into my life, but also how I see them lived out in my life. Because to me, they really are like a sort of, they're a way of seeing, a way of being. They're a facilitation of an awareness to what's going on in the story of our lives. And so I was curious.
If those stories don't grow as you grow, or those like parts of your DNA don't grow as you grow, then they deserve to be shed. And I think naturally you shed what doesn't reflect things back to you. Like if there's a call and no response, then you just stop calling. And I think I still get a lot of response from a lot of the things that I don't necessarily look at the same way, but they still exist there. And yeah. But
I totally feel that. No, I was going to ask you, one of the things that's been a really interesting part of my journey the last few years is, you know, when you get into those conversations and for whatever reason, I couldn't even tell you exactly how it starts, but it feels like it always quickly hits. So it's some version of like, did you keep the faith, or are you a Christian now? And people hit you with like some version of that. And I'm curious, do you get that? And if you do, how do you respond to that?
Ooh, I don't get it as much, and I know I'm in like hyper agnostic coastal elite New York, so I don't get it a lot there. But definitely like coming home, there's always like did you find a good church?
Yeah,
And I was like, I did, and then he cheated on his wife, and then the other 2 pastors also were cheating on their wives. So I did, and then I didn't, and so I was like, we can talk about that more though. So that's usually where it goes, is more about the church. I think people are so concerned that I'm not in like a church,
right?
And that's at least of my concerns. That was like, especially in New York, church was like a networking thing for me. It felt actually so anti-religious. It felt more just like a support group in a way. A mega church support group, lights, and learning how to play around with someone else's 10% with fog machines and cameras. And in hindsight kind of was, but no, I never have a profound answer to that. I think, again, I bucked harder at it when I first like left church, or first kind of like re-examined religion and spirituality as a whole, or like what I thought about the truths that I was taught, or the truths I experienced or now believed. Because I when I hear someone else get asked that and they're like, you know, I'm just a spiritual person, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, I'm also equally kind of offended by that answer, so I never want to give that answer. Well, so that's sort of where I've come to, because that's where when people will ask me, and admittedly now that you say it, it hasn't happened that much, but like once in a while it'll come up. It's usually with like Uber drivers or something at this point, I feel like. Oh, I've had some good Uber drivers talk about religion with me.
You know, where it'll come up that it's like, oh, you know, I was homeschooled, you know, super Christian. Like, oh, are you still a Christian? And I'm like, and so usually what I'll say is, I'm not sure what that means to you. If you asked 12-year-old me if this current me was a Christian, he would say no. But if you ask me now, I would say probably more so than that version of me. And so, like, what does that mean to you? Because it's the same thing. It's the same thing as when people say, oh, are you spiritual? Or, oh, I'm just spiritual. It's like, that doesn't mean anything to me. And at this point, when people say like, oh, I'm a Christian, also doesn't mean anything to me. It means everything from like your Kim K getting railed on YouTube wearing a cross to your Joel Houston to your, whoever, wherever. And that's no judgment on any of those people. But it's like, there's nothing in there outside of, we all culturally have heard the same stories and sometimes identify with those stories, I guess. But like, to me, I feel like it has to go deeper to like, how does that play out in your life? And I don't really find it to be a super meaningful question in general. Like, it's a very easy label safety thing, almost what you're saying, where people are like, oh, do you go to church or not? It's like, oh, if you do, you're okay. And I don't have to ask any further questions. And if you don't, I should probably be worried about you until you go to church. But like, it's sort of like when you're 21 and everyone's like, so when are you going to college? It's like, they just don't know what else to ask. That's the only question.
Yep.
And for me,
the
it's
structures and the lack of it that scare people. And literally, Richard Rohr, it's easier to belong to a group than it is to belong to God.
Right.
That is the substance of that entire like thing that I think about all the time. Is like, if I ask if you're Muslim, it's like easy for me to try to put you in a group. Or if I ask if you're Christian, like, because you're a white dude from the Midwest, like, it's easy for me to just start like processing who you are because I have these pre-built structures that society tells me you are, or that 12-year-old me interprets what that word means. And that's, it's such an easier thing, I think, for humans to process. But I get so dissatisfied with those types of answers. And like the same kind of the dissatisfaction I get when people are like, so where do you work? Or what do you do for work? It's like, that's the first question we're engaging on. It's like, you might like, how's the weather? We both just walked in the same room from the outside. We both know how the weather is. Like, I want someone to ask me what the most expensive mistake in life I've ever made was. Like I want to have a little like interesting conversation because I know that you're not like every other person.
Right.
Because I've discovered how unlike any other person I am.
Right.
Probably in the past 10 years alone. And I want to, I'd rather spot the differences than spot this more sameness. Like, I don't want to align you with something.
Right. Dude, that's such an interesting way of putting it.
Everyone.
That you're not interested in bucketing someone into a pre-existing category, but like, I'd rather be more interested in what makes you you. And I do feel like that's a lot of what that societal tendency is, where it's like, oh, you're a photographer, you're a filmmaker, you're a Christian, you're a whatever, and now I get to like put you neatly in this little bucket and then leave you there and walk away, or treat you based on how I treat that bucket. Yeah, it's very easy, right? But like, it's not. It's
compartmentalization for the emotionally ignorant.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So given that, I guess like what comes up for me is there's a bunch of stuff that I would love to talk about more, but in the spirit of you saying like, I don't want to talk about the weather, is there anything that you would be most excited or curious to dig in on together?
Ooh. I could talk about like where we go after we die for probably 10 hours. Or what even is death. I could talk about that for like 20 years. I feel like I've been talking about it for the past 5. I've almost died a few times too, so that's probably this is why I could talk about that stuff for.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I've seen just from the outside your recent cancer journey and the aspects of it that you shared on social looked brutal. Well, I was inspired by your both honesty and vulnerability, and still finding that spark in the midst of all of that. Like, I think that's one of the things that I really key in on people at this point, because I feel like I grew up around so many people who had that sort of like toxic positivity thing, right? The like spiritual bypassing, it's all good, God's got me, whatever, and just like in the face of everything. And when I see someone who can both own the reality of what they're going through and not turn into like pure cynicism, there's some inner strength in there that I feel like I don't even know that there's words for it, but like when you can just tell that someone has that thing in them. And like, I'm curious, one, what the heck happened with the cancer thing? And two, where did that internal capacity to hold that experience come from?
For sure. I can give you the, I'll give you like the 10-minute like life story. So got laid off from that agency job. 6 months later, I got diagnosed with cancer on my 23rd birthday. And it was stage 3C, so the one right before 4, esophageal cancer, like old man cancer. Like you have to smoke 30 plus years, you know, drink every day to even potentially get it. So it was a very freak thing. Up to the diagnosis, everyone was like, it's definitely not cancer. You're going to be fine. It's definitely not cancer. You're going to be fine. And turns out it was cancer.
What led you to looking into that? Were you having symptoms or like
trouble swallowing? Like
okay.
It's over probably the course of 6 months. And they're like, oh, you have acid reflux. Take some Tums, take some Prilosec. And I was like, okay, fair. Tried that. Didn't work. And got to the point where I couldn't swallow water. And my ex-wife and I at the time, for context, I got married 3 months before I got laid off. And then immediately got cancer.
And that's at 22?
22. You need a classic Christian evangelical pipeline of,
yep.
I was a child bride. And so went
I was 21, so I get it.
Yeah, I went right into that. And that just was like the first year of marriage was like, oh, you got cancer and it's bad. And
you got laid off.
Got laid off, yeah. And so I was jobless, freelancing, doing design work, Sam's Club mailers, really inspired work.
Yeah.
And had like kind of a death sentence of a diagnosis. So like it's possible you make it out, but like it's not good. So we're going to do chemo, radiation, all the things, and a huge surgery. So a huge midline scar, took the base of the cancer out. And so that took about 5 or 6 months of just constant stuff. And then I was kind of.
And how are you handling that? Like you're 23 and you hear you have esophageal cancer. I feel like that's big news.
It is big news, and I know that, like, to your point of like this inner strength thing that there's no words for. There's probably some like German word that we don't know that contains the multitudes for it. I've seen it in other people that have gotten bad news, whether it's like about their job or their health or their spouse or something. Like they just kind of buckle up. Like you're in the car, like you have to go somewhere. You don't know where you're going, but you gotta strap in. Like you're leaving the house, like that's not an option. Put your shoes on. And so it very much became like, all right, what's the next thing? I can't think about that I may not make it. And like that, not because I'm like toxically positive, but just because like that does me no service to think, oh, I've got 2 years. What am I going to do for the next 2 years? Like it wasn't doing me any service to think what my make-a-wish would be, you know,
right.
That didn't serve me well. And maybe it's like I was, again, maybe toxically curious, concerned with my productivity and what I brought to the world. And especially at that age, like you're so ambitious and full of ego, especially as a creative person. Like I thought I had so much more to offer. And I think that made me a little bit want to like put my boots on and be like, oh, I'll get through it. I'll figure it out. Yeah.
So your perspective in the midst of that, like you hear the diagnosis and you're like, we'll get through this.
Kind of. And just like, well, what's next? And then immediately I see everyone around me taking the news, right? Like my mom, my dad. My dad literally passed out. Like they come and give the news, my dad faints. They take him out on a stretcher because he just couldn't even handle it. So I see it affecting everyone else around me, and I realize that I almost like don't need to be strong for myself. I need to be strong because they're going through it more than I am. Like,
right, which is a wild experience.
Emotional pain. Yeah, you become a caregiver in another way when they're caregiving for you. And that honestly took years of therapy to process, like. Because there's guilt, there's trauma, there's all those things that come along with that that are really layered. But that was the initial thing too, is like I didn't want to look scared or weak or any of those things because I knew it would extrapolate or even compound what they already felt, like seeing me start to go through this. And like I'd never shaved my head. I did chemo and my hair thinned, but I'd like refused because I didn't want people to like look at me like I was a cancer patient. I didn't want people to like, but I knew I was like, it wasn't a day I woke up in full denial and just like stopped going to chemo. I did all the things, but I definitely was concerned about the appearance and acceptance of it, or how much of it I accepted. And I was like, wherever I can cut a corner, I'm going to, and like not shaving my head, like making sure I was still working, and like, I really don't know what, other than trying to babysit other people's feelings more than my own, being kind of part of that.
Yeah, dude, I totally feel that. I went through an experience similar but different. Back in March, I was with a friend, and they went through a sort of parental roller coaster, I guess would be the way I would put it, where like we were hanging out, they find out, hey, we're pregnant. It's early, but we found out we're pregnant. And then like 2-3 days later, they're like, something's wrong. We're going to go to the hospital. They go to the hospital. They come back and we're like, so what happened? And like, well, the doctor did a bunch of scans. They came in and they go, okay, like, hopefully you guys are ready for this, but you're having twins. And like, okay, not what we were expecting. And then, so then they're like readjusting to that. And then it was like 2 or 3 days after that, they're like, something feels wrong again. They go in and they go, oh, yeah, you lost both babies. And so in like the span of a week, you go from telling your friends and family, we think we're having a miscarriage, we're actually having twins, actually we're having nothing. And for me, something that I've personally found in those experiences is that the most valuable thing I can be is just there. And so I told my buddy straight up, I was like, look, I'm not going to tell you that everything's okay, because it's not. And I'm also not going to act like this is the end of the world, because it's not. And this is what's happening, and everything that you're feeling is fine, and I'm here for you. And I'm not going to give you the woe is me thing, and I'm not going to give you the everything works out for good thing. We're just here. And it was a really interesting space to actually spend a few days with him in that, and to give him space to process. Because I feel like I've felt that at various points in my life, where it's like the hardest part is everyone around you catastrophizing the thing or minimizing the thing. It's like those are the two ways most people go. Is either like, you'll be fine, or, oh no, this shouldn't happen to you. And it's like, can we just stay here? And like, I find, I mean, there are definitely times that I get pulled off center, right? Like, I'm not some guru, but like, to your point, I've always found that I'm generally pretty good at actually staying centered. And the hardest part is usually managing all the people around you who have no capacity, it seems, to actually deal with that. And you're the one going through it. So I feel like that is something that even in storytelling, I've found to be really important, where when you're wading into those deep questions, being able to just be with people and to be like, I don't have to say it's okay. I don't have to say, don't worry, we're never going to show this. Like, that's one of my pet peeves, is when people start crying and people are like, oh, don't worry, we won't use this. I'm like, what sort of weird, shamey, subconscious thing is that? But like the ability to actually just be with someone else's feelings and their experience, and your feelings and your experience, and to allow both to exist without having to do anything one way or another, is such a powerful skill, and one that I'm super grateful to have actually gone through some of those really challenging things, to then be able to hold that space for other people, because you know what it's like to not have that and to have everyone going crazy. So I guess I'm curious, like, for you coming through that, so you're managing everyone's emotions, you're managing your parents, and, you know, not wanting to look weak. And I feel like that's also a tricky game, right? Where like you're actually kind of strong, but it's like, I can't even let myself not be strong. And so it's like, what part of me is actually kind of like struggling with this and being honest and grieving about this? And so like for you, maintaining that strength through it, both structurally and maybe in some level with the mask, when you went back through and were doing therapy and talking about these things, like, did you find that there was grief in there that had to come up, or not so much?
I think I had a lot of guilt. And I think I was angry, but I was angry through it. I definitely like had my just like angry till I cried. I think I grieve with anger, like that. I think for better or for worse, that's like I tend to feel just so angry when I'm grieving something. I know it's like part of the whole process, but it's like my whole process. And yeah, I had so much guilt, right? I was newly married. I just told this person and like, hey, let's get married. I want to marry you. Let's get married. Like, we were involved in like ministry, kind of had the life planned out. We were going to adopt a kid. And then I kind of ripped that away. Not that I did, but like, you know, situationally, like it got ripped away. And the lens shifted from like celebrating us being married in the first year to like, oh, you're dying potentially. Who knows? Like, and then the grief that I saw my parents go through, there's guilt for that because like it was a year-long process, this thing, and then it got better for a second, and then it got way worse. Like the cancer came back a year later, and then that's what took me to New York. So not only did I like uproot our entire life, you know, it was like a whole shift for my wife at the time. Like she had to forsake a lot of our collective dreams together. And yeah, it was all guilt, man. I think all those years of therapy were just realizing that what was actually in my control, like what I actually could be in control of, and that I didn't earn actually any of that guilt. That guilt was a lot of just like me trying to like, it was almost selfish the way I was making or letting myself feel guilty was actually a form of like, it was a form of like being narcissistic about the situation, being like, well, I could have done this, or I could have not done this, or if I didn't get sick, this wouldn't happen. And it's just so many I statements that actually were not beneficial.
Right.
And, or fruitful, or good for me, or good for anyone else for that matter. And that was, yeah, a lot of my therapist just saying the same things over to me and over and over again. Just like you didn't give yourself cancer. You didn't accept an offer of something that like, you didn't go gamble away your family's life savings. Like that could be something to be guilty of for, but this is a different unfortunate lottery. But
so
yeah, I think that's it.
So you get the diagnosis, you go through treatment for about a year originally. Is that right?
For like 6 months, and then
6 months.
Surgery and recovery. And
that was like
the first 6
what
months.
What are they actually, they taking stuff out of your throat? How's that work?
I had like a golf ball sized tumor at the base of my esophagus, top of my stomach. And so they cut you open, take the main mass out, and then a bunch of margin, just in case, like little safety cuts. And by little safety cuts, they took out the top third of my stomach and lower 2/3 of my esophagus, and then just stretched it to connect. And so
surgery is crazy.
Surgery is nuts. And for context, when I got married that year, I was 210 pounds. 5'7", 210. Very just a hefty, as a husky boy.
Yeah.
And I'm a slim 240 soaking wet right now. Or no, sorry, 140 soaking wet. Yeah. But I think immediately after surgery, I was like 160 pounds. Just, it's like gastric bypass. Like I was just the only silver lining was like I got a free like weight loss program.
Yeah.
And so that was wild. The surgery recovery was a little nuts, but then I was good. I was feeling pretty healthy. But like the surgery was invasive, but the recovery was only like 2 months.
Okay.
2 or 3 months of like I was walking in the hospital a couple days after surgery, but I was in the hospital for 14 days, so it was a little steep.
Yeah.
But anyways, good. Have like a good little 6-month window of like normalcy. Actually, my friend's studio that I'm in now, he opened this 10 years ago, and like I remember going to the party for this space, and I was like, oh, I'm feeling good. Like I had like my first beer after surgery. Like it was like things were getting a little more normal again. And so the beginning of the next year comes around, and I book a trip to go hike in South Dakota with a friend of mine. So we drive from like Cincinnati to South Dakota, and we're hiking and like in the Badlands, and my leg starts hurting. I'm like, oh, that's annoying. Come back, leg's still hurting. Go to the orthopedic doctor. They do a MRI, and they're like, have you ever had cancer before? And I was like, yep. They're like, you need to go to your oncologist. It looks like you have a mass forming between your femur bone and the muscle, and that's where that pain's coming from. And so I was like, okay, cool. So I go in, get a scan. It is there. It's in my vocal cords. I was starting to lose my voice, and I didn't know why. Is in my shoulders, is in my lungs. And within a few weeks, I was not really able to talk, couldn't walk. And it was clinically stage 4. Like, that was kind of curtains. And was pretty on schedule with the prognosis. Like, it was like, all right, made it like a year out from diagnosis. That means I probably got another year, and it's probably going to be pretty shitty.
And you're, what, 23 and a half, 24-ish around this time? 20,
a little over 24, yeah.
Okay.
And so my oncologist, bless his heart, he was a rock star through all this. Here in Cincinnati, he was just like, hey, I don't have to be your quarterback. You can switch teams. I need you to, if you're willing to, I need you to go somewhere where they will swing for the fences and try new things and do things off label, off script. Because I can't legally do any of those things here. My hands are tied just by law. There are drugs I want to give you that I know might work, but I just can't. And so you're going to have to go to Houston, Nashville, or New York. Like, those are the 3 hospitals I know offhand that I can get you an appointment and can try something different than what we've done or what we have to offer. Because all I have to offer you now is palliative care, like basically in-home hospice, just to get you comfortable and ride it out. And that still didn't seem like an option to me. Like, that just, I was like, I already did the whole thing. Like, honestly, I was pretty pissed. I was like, I did surgery, and now we're back here again. Like, Jesus. Yeah. And I was also, this point I got mad with God, because I was very like faith oriented through the first bit. And I was like, God brought me through this. I was using all the language I was taught to use, and like praying the way I was taught to pray. Like,
right. Do I walk through the valley of the shadow of cancer?
Exactly. And like, I was like, I made it through. Like, we're good. And I was like, oh, fuck. We're not good. And so I was really like mad at God, but I didn't want to give up. And so we ended up in New York for literally to save my life. And so got an appointment with who's my doctor now. She's a rock star. She's a research oncologist specializing in like GI stuff. And she wanted to send me home. She was like, I don't think you should be in New York. This is the last place. I rolled into her office in a wheelchair, and my ex-wife is like having to speak for me because I can't even my throat doesn't work. So I'm like writing shit down. Yeah. And this doctor very wisely was like, you are not cut out to be coming to New York to do anything. Like, it's the last place you should be. So she's like, you should go home. I was like, that's not an option. I already packed my suitcase. We're already kind of here. Yeah. Schedule me for the next appointment. Like, we like forced ourselves on her.
And what are you just like at a hotel at this point, or are you like getting an apartment?
At a hotel. We're at a hotel. And then within that first week that we're in New York, someone heard of our story, and they're like, oh, we have some friends. They're worship leaders at a church in New York. They live in Manhattan, and they're from Australia. And they're like, they have to go back for like 6 months because they just had a baby, and they're going to go travel with it to meet the grandparents. So they're wanting you to have their apartment. And I was like, oh, something knock and it shall be opened. I don't know. Yeah. But that happened literally the week that we committed to like staying in New York. And so the first few months we're at these kind people's apartment that they just let us live there in a 2-bedroom Upper East Side apartment for free. Wow. And that's how I started treatment then. And the first one didn't work. The first 3-4 months of treatment and extra radiation just didn't do anything. Nothing grew anymore, but I still couldn't talk. I had to get a Botox injection into my vocal cords so that they could push the paralyzed one up against the normal one. Otherwise, I could like choke in my sleep. So they were doing all the things to like keep me alive and then kick the can down the road. And then finally switched treatments probably 3 months into New York, and it did start working. And I was able to walk again from like the wheelchair to a cane, like I was still limping around. But because they gave me so much morphine to take whenever I wanted, I would just pop a morphine and walk miles through the city on a cane. Because I was like, if I can't feel it, it ain't real. And I kind of just pushed myself to like try to get my body moving again, like a law of physics, right? Objects in motion stay in motion. And so my kind of fight was with like myself. And I was like, well, treatment's starting to work. Let's just kind of, there's gas on the fire now is how it felt. And so Within 6 months, I was pretty much back on my feet, like still bubble wrapped, still like actively taking treatment. They lowered it from like once every 2 weeks to once a month, and I'm seeing my doctor once a month, getting scans every 3 months. Like, it's still a thing, very ever present in my life. But my wife gets a job. I start working a little bit. Like, it just, New York kind of is like,
we're here now.
All right, dude, we're here now. So after a year of like other people's apartments, we signed a lease. We got our own apartment, and it was like, oh, now it feels like we're choosing to be here versus it like we have no choice in anything. And it was the first semblance of control in my life, and I'm sure her life, that we had since we were married. Like, it just, everything else just felt decided for us, like one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. And so like, oh, hey, New York's it for now. Well, this is good for now. And like, my doctor's here. I get to go once a month and just be safe. She got really into her career, and I started freelancing again. And my kind of New Year's resolution to myself was that as I introduced myself to people, because when people asked what I did, because that's a common question in New York, they're like, what do you do? I would stumble. I'd be like, oh, I'm a designer. My first job was, I would tell them like a life story. Like, my first job was screen printing. Then I made MySpace layouts. Now I designed websites for like Ford. I just would stumble through all this vomit of nothing that mattered. And so a good friend of mine and like a mentor of mine was just like, what do you want to be doing? Like, what do you want to be doing? And have you ever done it enough to just say that's what you are? Can you just put all your eggs in one basket for a year, and would it cost you anything to do that? And I said, I don't think so. So I ended up just landing on telling people I was a filmmaker. I'd used camera. I was like, I'd done this enough. I'd made some music videos. Like, let's just commit to the bit for a year and see what happens. Like, manifest destiny situation. And so I did. And the first job I got from that was doing backstage branded content for Fashion Week. I was like the last person that should be going to Fashion Week, but it became like one of my biggest jobs I built the company with, and client I still have now for 8 years, came out of that. And it was just, came from saying, oh, I'm a filmmaker. I did this thing, and then did something for one brand. Another brand found it on Vimeo, and they were like, oh, hey, can you do the exact same Fashion Week thing for us? So we got to the point, I shot Fashion Week for 7 years, 2 seasons a year, probably 10 to 15 shows. Like, every supermodel, every designer, like, I've been lucky enough to go to, but it's not on my bingo card. But kind of came from that thing and gave me the opportunity to build a business in New York, which was smart and dumb all at the same time. But yeah, I did that. And so I've been in New York for 8 years. 7 years? 7 on 8? Yeah.
That's wild. So, quick question. When you were talking about like difficulty walking and like the morphine and the cane, is that neurological? Is that muscular strength? Is that just like overwhelming pain? Like, what is that experience?
Ooh, sharp pain. So like, specifically, one of the last things to kind of get better, just because it's inherently supporting your body's weight, was my leg. So my right leg, in between the femur in my thigh and the muscle on the inner thigh, there was a tumor. And that gap in space, it was like just swelling the whole area, but then I couldn't straighten my leg fully. So I was kind of at a permanent bend. And so like, as I'm standing, you know, I'm kind of like, I can bend back, but can't go past this. And so I'm kind of hobbling. And if I go a little too far or try to, it just like someone just shot me in the leg. Like, it's just like pins and needles. Like, you're just really on eggshells trying not to hurt it, break it, do anything worse. Like, there was a fear that the bone had gotten weak and potentially I could break it if I was not careful. So yeah, it was just like really painful. They said I would never get my range of motion back, to the point that they actually scheduled me for a surgery. They were going to chop out part of my femur and part of my shin and put titanium in and replace my knee with metal, and say like, at least cancer can't grow anymore. Like, and I was like, well, what's the recovery from that like? And they're like, oh, it's probably about 6 to 8 months plus like all the physical therapy. And I was like, I really don't want to do that. So I literally would challenge myself to just like walk 2 or 3 miles a day and take a bunch of morphine until I couldn't feel it anymore. And it got to a point I weaned off morphine with some like cannabis tinctures, and then my ex-wife had started going to a kickboxing class, and I was like, I'll go and just tell them like I need to be moving, but like I need to tell her what's wrong with me, and then maybe I'll do like just punching bag, I'll come with you or something, because I need to breathe and move my body. So I go, and she starts modifying some of the exercises to like let me still use my legs, and I got going so hard that I did a kick with the bag on my bad leg, and I pushed through where the tumor and the scar tissue had developed, and I felt it crack, and I got my full range of motion back.
Oh, wow.
And it was simultaneously the most painful and like borderline like orgasmic full body feeling from that release. And I went back to my physical therapist, and I was like, hey, so I did this thing you would have never recommended for me to do, but I think I fixed it. And sure enough, it did. And they were like, yeah, we would never have told you to do that, but also thank God.
Yeah.
So yeah, now I walk maybe too much and talk a little too much.
We're glad to have you. So
yeah,
you go through the second round, you get a lease in New York, you're getting back to working, you decide you're a filmmaker, Fashion Week kicks back up, and then like, so the recovery has gotten you back to the point where you can be at least public and active, but like, are you like clear and free for the most part at that point, or like you still dabbling in it?
They started basically using a term, no evidence of disease. So like there's a point at which like you're kind of never really cancer free, at least especially for me, because I was such a rare weird thing. And I did so many different types of drugs to get rid of it. They're not even sure what did it. Like I was like a guinea pig, which also was what led me to my recent thing this past summer of me almost dying again. But yeah, they just tried so much stuff. And so it was just like, let's keep an eye on it. But after about a year of clean scans, I was getting 4 a year at the time. They were like, you have 4 good scans where everything's invisible. It's gone. It's shrunk or gone or dead. And so we're going to say no evidence of disease. And so they call them NED scans for short. And so I've had NED scans for the past 5 years straight, 6 years.
Okay.
So pretty quickly, 2 years into New York, I was clean and kind of given like a mostly clean bill of health. Like they were just like, take it easy, but you're good. And I remember that year, my friend Brian, who's like a jazz musician, he does like residencies at like places, and the band he was with was doing a residency in Shanghai. And he's like, we're going for like a month. Can't really pay you anything, but we can get you a hotel room and a flight. Do you want to come, like film and just make a little video about the trip? And I was like, I'm there. I was pedaled to the floor. As soon as I was like, I think I'm good now. Like it was like anything, I don't care if it pays my rent. I just need to go do something. Like the rent I'll figure out in a later time. Which I think relationally in the marriage I was in was not super helpful, because not even just her, but like my entire family is like trying to bubble wrap me. They're like, oh, you're finally good. Let's just don't move. Don't do anything crazy. And I'm like, I'm going to China for a month. See you guys later.
Yeah.
But it did like, it was probably the highest dose of like inspiration or just lawlessness I've ever felt. Was like not even a new lease on life, just like what is life? Like, yeah, I just need to go. It's like someone just put $1 million in my hands is what it felt like. Which in a way, my health bills were up there, so they kind of did.
So how does that progress? I'm attempting to tie a few things together here, and you tell me if there's a way that this makes sense, because I want to understand, because you've talked about deconstruction, divorce, and almost dying. And so we're at the point where you're 3-4 years ago. So how do those 3 things thread together from your new Fashion Week empire and like starting to get back out, taking on this identity as a filmmaker? What starts tipping those scales?
I think it's a discovery journey. The deconstruction thing is like a discovery thing, right? It's all unearthing. Every part of it, like the Fashion Week thing, the saying I'm a filmmaker, it's all unearthing what do I want? What's my identity? Like, who am I? What have I been? Who do I want to be? And I think my ex-wife is going through the same thing, with a little bit less of a vocabulary. Like I'm such a like, I'm just an overthinker. I'm always thinking about something or trying to make sense of something or make less sense of other things. And like, I read a lot. I've always been involved in like writing music with my friends and like writing in general. And so I'm going through these discovery things with, I think, a pretty decent tool belt and toolkit for those things. She's going through the same thing. We're both in a new city, and I think she's struggling with it kind of silently. And so that, plus the grief and the guilt of the cancer and all these things, it put us in really intensive and really fruitful like counseling for the last couple of years of our marriage. I guess we've been divorced for 2.5, 3 years now. And it was kind of a product of our deconstruction, and on her end there were some like gender identity discovery things that were not safe enough to examine when we were in church or when she was raised Southern Baptist. Like there weren't those freedoms, and we were now in a very free, to whatever extent, place where we're exposed to different people, different ways of talking and thinking. And it was a realization of wanting different, not more. And how is that a place we can get to together? And it just logistically wasn't. And it was a really hard death of the thing of like wanting a traditional marriage but not having the traditional ingredients, right? It's like trying to make a loaf of bread with gluten-free flour. It's actually really hard. Like you just don't actually have the chemical reaction to make it stick together. And that's kind of how that felt. But it was a product of discovery, and also like I think the last few years of the marriage, I wasn't happy with myself. I wasn't happy with our relationship, and I think I built a lot of the business out of spite. Like I think I leaned into it because not only did I think a lot of other people that I came up with didn't think I could do it, I wasn't sure she thought I could do it. Which again, a lot of counseling taught me how to communicate those feelings with her in a productive way. But the initial part of it was like the fuel on the fire was like, I don't think anyone believes in me. So I'm just going to do it. I'm going to say I'm a filmmaker. I'm going to go to China for a month. Anything that comes across the table, I'm a yes man right now. And yeah, I'm really grateful for what it brought me. And it did eventually bring me a lot of clarity, but also a lot of pain, a lot of expense, like emotionally and also financially. But I don't know if I've ever been, happier is not the right word. I don't think I've ever been as whole and grateful as I am now. And it took cancer, it took divorce, it took deconstruction, and even deconstruction is such a vague way of saying like I just kind of like poured the puzzle out on the table and just started putting it together. Like I think religion and spirituality and all these things for me was the puzzle on the shelf that you knew what it looked like, but you never put it together yourself. And I think that process for me was actually laying it out on the table, putting it together myself, and realizing kind of how big the picture actually is. The one in the box is a lot smaller than what it actually is. And reorienting how I move forward in the world. I think it's my 30s too, is like my 20s was just like taking it all in, life in the world, making a lot of choices for me. And not that anything is really in our control, but in my 30s, I feel like I want to choose as much as I can moving forward. Like I want to end up somewhere that I actually had a thought of happening. And that's a luxury and it's a privilege. And it's like, I feel like there's already a like necklace of miracles strung together in my life that I'm like, why would I doubt that I can't get to some place that I desire or dream of or feel equipped for? But yeah, it's been a wild 8 years. It's been a wild year. I almost died again this summer. Basically, the drugs that saved my life potentially thinned my stomach lining and my stomach exploded. Because they don't know. Prolonged exposure to the drugs that saved my life are also some of the things on a list that they're now researching. You're like, oh yeah, it may thin out your soft tissues. And I was on 4 flights a month for the last bit of last year. Like this time last year, I was all over the country trying to drum up work. Work was finally slowing down and getting kind of scary pre-election year, pre-recession. And it was the busiest, most profitable year the business had had, but also I could see the writing on the wall for the next year. So I was door knocking. I was canvassing, right? I was like, oh, meeting in LA? Yeah, I'll be there. Cool. All right. Doing a team offsite in Vancouver? Cool. Let's go do it. All right. We got to go do this thing in Miami? Cool. All right, cool. My friend wants to go to the F1 race in Vegas, paid for, make some content? Cool. Let's go do it. Just kind of went just balls to the wall. And I was starting to feel it physically. I was filming a resort in Sedona, Arizona by myself for one of our hotel clients, and I had brought like an Ursa Mini, like a whole rig. And this is last October, last November. It was right before Thanksgiving because I went from there, came here for Thanksgiving. I couldn't lift the camera because I had 102-degree fever. I didn't know what it was. It wasn't COVID. I was testing for COVID, didn't have it. And I just gotten the iPhone 15, and I was like, I think I'm going to have to film this whole thing on my phone and not tell them. And so I literally filmed the entire thing on my phone in a drone. And I would fly the drone from my room and not leave. And I just laid in bed in my robe. And not because I was trying to be mad luxury. It was just because I was so sick. And so I was feeling like really, really bad. And I started having lower back pain in into December, like Christmas, New Year's. And I was like, doesn't feel good. January rolls around. Still busting the walls down, New York to LA twice a month. And March comes around and I'm like feeling real bad. Like to the point I'm just like getting drinks at dinner every time we go out to dinner because I'm like I want to numb whatever back pain I'm having. Like I'm like I'm not even drinking for enjoyment anymore. I'm like numbing something, and not emotionally, just physically. And so I like go to a doctor. They're like, hey, yeah, just like take these muscle relaxers. Like, all right, cool. Keep going crazy. Beginning of May comes around. I get off a red-eye flight from LA and I pass out. And I was like, oh, I was exhausted. That's crazy. But I'll go see my cancer doctor because some bulbs were going off up here. I was like, maybe I should go check. She's like, well, we'll do like vitals. You're fine. Blood pressure's fine. Your weight's fine. We'll schedule blood work, a few days from now. And I was like, all right, cool. Go home. The weekend comes. Sunday rolls around. I can't get out of bed. It's now navigated to I have like ab pain, and I was like, what's going on? And my girlfriend lives with me, and she was like, do you need me to take you to the hospital? I was like, I think so. It's Mother's Day of all days. And get to the hospital. I'm in septic shock. I'm whiting out. And while I'm awake, they have to put a chest tube in, and they drain 4 liters of fluid. And so basically what had happened, my stomach had ruptured, and for likely since January, so we're talking January, February, March, April, May, we're talking 5 months, it had just been leaking into my pleural cavity to the point that I had probably had an insane infection, fought it off, but depleted every single white blood cell. I had 4 blood transfusions my first night, and they drained all the infection they could. I immediately went into surgery that night. Woke up in the hospital, and they're like, that was crazy, but you're going to get out in like 3 days, dude. You're going to be fine. I was like, sick, easy. But what they later found out was when they closed up the holes, they ripped another one because the tissue was so malnourished and so damaged. And they were like, hey, remember the 3-day thing? Sorry. Maybe like a week. And I was like, all right, cool. A week comes and goes. They're like, all right, we're going to have to do a 3rd surgery. And I was like, okay, so what's the recovery from that one? Like, they're like, probably another few days. I end up 5 surgeries later and 40 days later and $1.5 million bill later, leaving the hospital. And I left the hospital. I wasn't able to eat or drink for those 40 days. And it was about 2 more weeks until I could actually swallow anything. So I was on like nose tube. I had this like PICC line in my arm. They sent me home actually with a chest tube. They were actually one of the few hospitals that had like a portable thing I could go home with, because they're like, you're not going to heal in the hospital. I think we figured that out. Like, the research is too damning that like people heal better at home with their dogs, with their partners, with their things. So we need to get you home, whatever that cost, like whatever it takes. So to NYU Langone's testament, they did that. Like, they moved mountains to get me to just be at home in a recliner with a bunch of medical devices that we had to learn how to use real fast. And so that was probably another couple weeks before I was even really cognizant of like even my body, because I was on so many crazy IV pain drugs and all this stuff filtering out. I lost more hair during that than I did from any chemo, just from stress and the surgeries. And I was just emaciated. I was like, it was way more rough than any cancer thing I'd ever gone through. And it was the closest I'd technically ever been to death. They were like, a couple hours later, you wouldn't have made it. And which is fair. I mean, I literally, the whole like, I was reading a book, Balancing Heaven and Earth. He talks about his like kind of near-death experience, and it's actually the first time I've seen someone illustrate what I felt in the hospital. And it was like, you get to the point of like, not even acceptance, like you're literally seeing like a light, and you're just like relieved, like you kind of feel good. Like, I remember once I was in the hospital and they were like, they didn't even plug me into anything yet. I was just on a table, and I was like, I'm like kind of chilling. Like, I feel pretty good. Like, I could, if this is it, this is it. Like, I was resigned like to the idea. And there wasn't even an idea. Like, death wasn't death. Like, life wasn't life. I was in this like, the overlap of the Venn diagram between life and death. Like, I was there. And yeah, that like part of the Balancing Heaven and Earth is like him always searching for that and things. And I was like, I feel like I'll always be searching for that for some degree, maybe for the rest of my life. And that was like a huge, cancer didn't even give me that. Cancer gave me like, oh, cool, I'm grateful to be alive. That was hard, shitty, life-threatening, but wasn't like someone pulled a trigger and it was a blank. Like, that's what the last thing felt like. But yeah, bit of a doozy. And then I similarly approached getting back into work with the same energy. But literally the month before I got that whole situation, or before I almost died, so I had 2 employees at the time, one in LA full time and one in the office in New York with me. And I sat them down. I was like, hey, it's a weird year economically, emotionally. Like, it's an election year, recession, the Olympics, like all these things, and the work is slowing down, and what work is coming in I'm not super proud of. We filmed like an esthetician in Beverly Hills, like doing like triple layer skin peels. Like, I'm like, this is not, this ain't it. Like, it just isn't. I used to scoff at like Fashion Week, but I was at that point, I was like, I miss that. Like, that was so much better, like work. Or just making music videos for our friends for $5. Like, I'd rather do that and struggle than succeed at doing what we're doing. Yeah. And everyone was on board. Like, I work with my best friends. And so like we get it. Like, I was like, yeah, so I'm giving us a 6-month timeline. Like, if in 6 months we don't have shitloads of money, like fuck you money, to say no to more things that we don't want to do, or just a ton of work that we're super excited about, that we are happy to struggle with, then I'm going to fire all of us. Like, I'm going to put us all freelance. I'll let the brand stand and we can service it as freelancers and contract for it. But like, it's just from an expense and overhead standpoint, the only way to get to a point of being able to say no, if you're not making the fuck you money, is to just limit all your overhead to the point you can afford to say no. Right. From a lesser standpoint. And I was like, and I'll go get a day job. Like, we'll get a real job. And then like, when cool stuff comes through, we'll do it. And so then I almost die the next month, and everyone's like, oh shit, good thing we started the timeline. And I was like, yeah. And so that timeline literally ended in October, and did exactly what I said, fired myself. I got a real job, which was harder to get than I thought it was going to be. And it's my first real job in 10 years. I've not been employed by someone other than myself in a decade. So it's going to be a doozy.
How did that happen? Like, how did that come about?
Getting a real job, or getting
a real job like that. Because that's something I think a lot of us, especially in the last like year or two, have like romanced the drink of just like, what if I just went and got a salary? And I always feel like there's this inner tension where I'm like, on the one hand, I'm a catch, right? Like I have so much experience. I've done so many things. Like I'm a very like high level multidisciplinary person. And then on the other hand, I'm like, I also haven't had a real job basically ever. Like I worked at like a grocery store and a pizza restaurant and like a hardware store and then a Marshall's. Like I had a few high school jobs and then I've done this since I was 18. And so there's always this part of me that I'm like, could I just like kick this off into the sea and just go get like some cushy agency job, or would I just like, would that be hard? And I think so when you say it's harder than you think, I'm just curious what that process was like.
Yeah. So I think agency stuff isn't hard to get into. It's like getting a job that I guess pays me what I actually know I'm worth is hard. One, the economy, the job market's just bad. But like, for example, my first exposure to agencies was as a freelancer in a very insanely like growing, like new social media rich economy where everything was just like fresh and cool and fun. But somehow I was doing mailers for Sam's Club, but it was easy to like get in as a freelancer, but I was like, I don't want to freelance. The whole point of this is like clocking in, clocking out. I want something predictable, like for my own health and stability and all these things. And so I just did the traditional thing. I was like, I guess I'll put together my resume. I made like a creative director book. I made like a 20-page like deck, right, of like stuff I had worked on and that I was proud of over 12 years. And I was proud of it, was submitting it with my resume, all these places for like what I thought I was capable of doing, which was like senior level CD work. Like I wanted to be writing more. I didn't really need to touch a camera anymore. I felt like I'd proven that part of myself to myself enough that I didn't need to do that anymore, like for money. And so I was like, I want to be the idea guy. I'm good at leading teams. I want to be in the room with the people. I want to be in the writer's room, like building a collaborative environment with people. So it's like senior CD, group creative director, maybe in-house at an agency working on like one or two brands. Perfect. Could not get an interview. And like I knew people, couldn't even get an interview for that. So I started lowering my sights a little bit. I was like, regular creative director. All right. Okay. I literally was applying for like, all right, cool. Social media coordinator. Let's just see what I can get. And I was like, there's no responses. I think I have it tracked somewhere. I applied for like 300 jobs.
Wow.
And I got 2 interviews. And the 2 interviews I got were brute force. I had to like track down the hiring manager, find their email them and be like, hey, I applied for this role. Would love to just chat further. Like, here's my book. Here's my thing. And one of the interviews was for like a job that was way out of my, like if my sights were here, it was up here. It was like VP of creative for a huge like brand. And I was like, okay, that's insane, but they want to interview, so that's cool. And that kind of opened up my thoughts a little bit. I'm like, I think maybe I'm underselling. Maybe my sights were actually a little low at the height they were. I think maybe people are opening my book and being like, oh, actually, they're misguided. He's misguided. He's actually barking up the wrong tree. So I was like, all right, whatever. I was super discouraged. And I started thinking about like the work that I've always wanted to do is always, like, even when I picked up a camera, the first thing I made when I was 10 years old was a fake Geico commercial. And like, I've always wanted to make ads, and I was like, but that it hasn't always been video. Like, camera was my first love, but it was just a medium. The message was always, I think, what I valued. And so I also had this dumb idea a few years ago for like a Pepto-Bismol campaign that licensed the song Taking Care of Business, and it would be Taking Care of Bismuth. And because that's the active ingredient in Pepto-Bismol. And I know that it actually doesn't make sense on paper. And I know a brand manager down the street at Procter & Gamble that would tell me, yeah, no, it's not a good idea. Or like, no, we would never make that. Like, I know 20 reasons that he would give me for it not being able to be made. So I was like, this has been my notes app for a while. I'm gainfully unemployed, kind of getting healthy again, have a little runway in the bank from the business, so I'm just kind of sitting in the office doing nothing. Let me just make the thing. And worst case, I get a cease and desist and I get to frame it, right? And that could be fun. And so I make an entire taking care of bismuth campaign with like fake out-of-home ads, a bunch of motion graphics of like dripping sexy text with like bismuth. And I was exploring like AI tools because I didn't really play with them at all yet. And I was like, I just need to see what's out there. I was like, oh, this is dangerous. This is fun. And it felt like getting the cracked copy of Photoshop. You're like, oh, I can remove someone from a photo with the clone stamp brush in only a handful of hours of my time? Wow.
Totally.
It felt like that kind of revelation. And so I made this whole thing, and then I didn't know what to do with it. So I had built a whole website, takingcareofbismuth.com. I have a weird addiction for buying domain names. If I think of something's fun, just as a joke.
Same.
I went to go find obituary.com to see if it was taken, but it's bitch in the middle. And it was going to be a website where you go and just like, you can release yourself to be roasted once you die.
Yeah.
So you can go sign up, and then once you die, people can come to this public forum and just roast the shit out of you. But it was $3,500, and so I didn't buy it. But anyways, so I had takingcareofbusiness.com, built a Squarespace site, and I was like, well, I want to share this with the world, but I don't like know how to do it. And I've made a few TikToks, but anything substantial. And I was like, well, let me just make a TikTok about how I did it, because I think people care about AI enough that they'll probably pay attention. And so I screen recorded most of the journey with it, and I put it all together. Was like, hey, I made this thing. And then it went kind of viral on TikTok enough to where like I got 200 emails in a week.
Wow.
Whether it was from brands that were like, hey, we just need someone to freelance creative direct. We're launching a pet food company. Fuck Jerry reached out, was like, hey, I have a tequila company, and like we want to do some fun things. And I was kind of like, oh, I could just not get a real job. And I found myself at the point A again of like, oh, I could just keep freelancing. And I was like, no, I'm going to stand for what I want. I want the 9 to 5. And until someone comes across the desk with like coming for an interview, I need to stick to that, because I really I'm in a different era. Like, I'm not in that scrappy freelancer mode anymore. I just don't, I'm not built for it anymore. Like, my medical bill can tell me that. And so finally a couple opportunities started cropping up. One was like full-time at an ad agency, but they're very traditional ad agency, huge agency that like 15-year-old me would have literally like creamed his pants thinking they would even have my number. And they didn't know where to put me because they were so traditional. They were like, are you like a visuals creative director or like a words creative director? And I was like, I think a weird third thing. And I think it's kind of obvious. I think I'm like neither, but both. And they're like, oh, okay. So like went into the office, met the entire C-suite, like met these people. Like, this may be able to be tracked down to the agency, but like the guy I met invented the Livestrong band for Lance Armstrong. Like, these are like cream of the crop, insanely creative people that creatively can't see where to put me. They're like, we want you here, but like, there's like, you're not this, you're not that. I was like, but I am me. I am this. And it was so disheartening to think the people whose work I respect and look up to and like wanted to be at was like kind of like I was seeing how the sausage was made, and it was actually all filler. Yeah. And they couldn't land on an offer, and so I ended up getting reached out to by L'Oreal, which is like a funny full circle, like started in fashion, ended in beauty, but they were like, hey, that was really genius. Will you come in for an interview? And I was like, all right, cool. I go in, meet them, super nice. Felt they didn't even tell me the job description, or they told me the job description, but not the title. And I was like, oh, this is all just really cool day-to-day creative director work over a handful of brands, leading a small pod team of people, of like creatives, and they want to be scrappy where they can and then send like the bigger stuff to McCann out of house. So it was like, seems fun. And so they're like, yeah. So if you're interested, here's the formal HR process we have to go through. You just have to apply through this link and we'll flag it and go farther. And I'm having this conversation while still meeting with this agency. And I'm like, hey, I'm talking to L'Oreal, I think just for a CD job. And so like, let's land on something because I would like to be here. And I honestly like, I'm not trying to negotiate someone up a wall. I just would like a job. I'm not trying to like, I haven't had a job in 10 years. I've not negotiated a rate. I don't know how this works. I'm as dumb as it gets interviewing someone as far as like how the process goes. So I'm not trying to leverage anything, but I just need you to know that this conversation is happening. And so I go through the L'Oreal thing, and the link they sent me was for Assistant Vice President of Global Brand Creative. And I was like, the fuck is that? I was like, my man got his links mixed up. And so I text him and I was like, hey man, really cool meeting you. Thanks for thinking we can keep going in the process. I think you sent me the wrong link though. He's like, oh no, that's it. That's the job. And I was like, oh, okay. He's like, yeah, that's the job. Just apply, send your stuff through and you'll see where it goes. And I was like, all right, cool. So then I go back to the agency and I'm like, hey, so compelling things have happened. The job title is much different. Pay grade is much different. And I'm just being really transparent with you guys. I would like to be here, but it seems like you're scrambling to even make sense of who I am. So like, and I've gotten really close with like the creative director there, and I was like, I want to be buddies with you. So no hard feelings, but I really think if this other thing comes through, I'm going to have to take it. Like it just makes way more sense. Again, they seem to understand me more than you guys do. And no harm, no foul, but I think that might be it. So long story short, L'Oreal makes an offer within like a week. And apparently L'Oreal had heard that I was interviewing somewhere else. And they were like, yeah, this process for this role is usually like 4 months of interviews and like meeting everyone and before we make a decision. But we liked you and knew who you were off the rip. Like there was no guessing about who you were because of what you had made. Like we knew who you were before you walked in the door. And I was like, that's what I like to hear. And that is why I'm accepting this offer. And I felt seen, and it's really weird to be like, oh yeah, the biggest beauty company in the world, you feel seen by them. And it's like, no, but I feel seen by the people I'm working with.
Yeah.
And that was a huge, not on my bingo card, not a premeditated thing that happened. But yeah, really grateful. And that's like, it's kind of crazy that that's what it takes to get a job. But also I didn't go to college. Like I don't have a degree.
Right.
I barely graduated high school. Like it just, there's not a lot of paper that I even could make sense on.
Right.
You know, like
totally.
It just doesn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, if someone asked me for a resume, I would have no clue what to do.
Dude. Yeah. Like, I mean, that's the hardest thing to write. Like I don't think I have a problem talking about myself, but like objectively saying like, I did this for this long and it was this good. Like the performance metric part of it all, like
yeah,
how good are you at your job? And I was like, well, you can see my job.
Right.
Luckily, it's one of the only jobs you can actually judge by its cover.
Right. Totally. That's something that I've been trying to come back to, honestly, and like give myself a little bit more permission with, because to something you said way back at the beginning, I feel like there's a point where I got so sick of all the posturing in like the film world, especially, and it's just like, award-winning this, that, like it's all just sort of like single word things, and it's like, oh, Apple and Walmart, and it's like, and my thing from my perspective where I was at the time, like I've done Apple and Walmart. I'm not proud of the Walmart thing that I did. It's kind of fine, you know, it's like B/C level Walmart app branded content stuff, like, but it feels like there's so much of this just like throwing words out, or you know, it's like Emmy award winning and you won a regional Emmy and the thing wasn't actually that good because anyone can win a regional Emmy, it seems. And I'm like, am I being too cynical? Because I just threw it all out the window. I was like, I'm not doing any titles, I don't call myself anything, because I just hate how scuzzy it all feels, but I feel like there is a point. I've been coming back to this place of like, I do have to at some point own the value I provide, and like hopefully the work speaks for itself. Hopefully the relationship speaks for themselves. But also I do have to actually be able to say what I do and what I love and how I've shown up. And I think that would be probably the hardest part for me is actually I fall into that, like, just judge the book by its cover. Look at the work and take it or don't, you know? But, like, being able to actually come in and own that position of, like, no, I actually did a lot of things in a lot of places, you know, whether that's even going back and going, like, podcast, Facebook group, you know, Patreon, the whole commercial side. Like, I feel like I've lived 7 lives in the last 12 years.
Yeah.
And then, like, went dark and came back. But that's the hard part for me lately is actually owning my accomplishments is almost the way I would say it. Like, I tend to fall into that, like, it's all whatever, you know?
Well, I think, again, kind of tying this into religion or, like, belonging to a group versus belonging to God is, like, it's easier. I think people buy into those accolades or the Emmy award winning, the I'm this, I'm that, to help others make sense of it.
Right.
And versus belonging to something a little more obscure and a little more gray, like actually it's kindness. Like, kindness is what I lead with. Like, creativity's second. Like, what people are buying is in the back seat, but I'm in the front seat. Like, the money is actually, like, that whole exchange will happen. That's just how the world goes around. And I think there's a lot of copy on our production company's website that is all, like, I wrote like that, like, what our value and our worth is has nothing to do with cameras or production or anything. It's a people business. It's a hospitality business at the end of the day. Like, you're making people feel comfortable, seen, heard. You're feeding them, sometimes clothing them, you know, like pampering them. And I get really burnt out by the posturing of it, and just, like, no one treated me kind when I, like, knocked on the door of traditional production or commercial world. Like, no one was nice to me. And similar to, like, building things out of spite, I really think any successes that I did force came from just, like, proving people wrong. Like, I can do it my own way, and I can be nice while I do it, and I can build a bigger table for people to sit at. And I'm actually going to do it with people that have never been on set before. And that was, like, kind of my main motivation, was to be like, and this is a weird thing to correlate it to, but I don't know if you were ever in a church where, like, that was your first access to, like, a nice soundboard or, like, a nice or a camera. Like, church was a weird place I'm really grateful for that gave me a place to, like, fuck around and find out, you know, because it wasn't on really anyone's dime. In hindsight it was, but, like, it was just, like, volunteering my time and hours to be an amateur at something, but hopefully find an interest and get better at it. And I've kind of treated my business that way, and, like, well, Nick's coming in, he's a photographer that's never done sales, but maybe he'll like doing biz dev. Like, maybe that'll be part of his job role. Or, like, this person that's PAing on set has never done it, but, like, it's a perfect place to start. The first makeup artist we ever hired had never done makeup artist in production or done production makeup work, and now they're on tour with Justin Timberlake. Like, we were the gateway drug for so many people to, like, realizing, oh, this is possible, this is real. And man, if it doesn't make me feel good on so many levels, like, I could just close the book on that and not think about profit margins or anything. That, like, it was an awakening for so many people, myself included, of, like, my capabilities as, like, a steward of something, a leader, a creator, and just a thinker. Like, I didn't have to ask for permission to speak or think when I knew I did for so long, and probably was for the better that I asked permission for those early years. But if it wasn't for that mentality, like, I don't think I would have landed a job without having to grunt it out like I did, and, like, be offended by the language that people use or the vocabulary of, like, I'm this, I'm that. I need a Fisher dolly, even though I'm shooting a vertical iPhone video. Like, that posturing and just stuff I kept seeing made me so mad. And it was the same inflammatory thing in my spirit that I felt when I, like, showed up at an agency at 22, 23, and was like, why are there all these pieces? And it's just to make someone else look good at their job.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather us just all be honest about it, call it what it is, and we can play the game.
Right.
We just got to actually be able to see the whole board.
Right.
Like, and say, like, it's a game. We're all playing with the same pieces, if we're at the table at least, and y'all are breaking some rules.
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's sort of, it's interesting. There's so many parallels in there to my experience, because I've always been in a similar space in that sense of like, I've never really fully identified with a title. Like, I feel like I got pushed in some ways into the DPing thing because I was doing a lot of things and starting to step to a higher level, and people were like, oh, well, are you going to direct or DP? And I was like, I don't know. I kind of like both. And they're like, well, you can't do both. You can't, if you ever want to do anything big, you got to pick one and then do that for 5 years. And I was like, well, I like shooting more than I like writing decks, so I guess I'm going to DP because like that seems like the more fun day to day compared to what I understand commercial direction to be. And so I like swallowed that for a few years. Super grateful for it. Learned so much from it. But then that's when I had my sort of like come to Jesus moment and disappeared off the face of the earth, deleted my Patreons, deleted my Instagram, took a month off. I was like, I just need to take a break and recenter, because I felt like I had accomplished all of the external markers of success, but I had lost sight of what I actually cared about in any of it. And I was like, I'm doing work I don't care about with people I don't care about. I have gear that's cool, but like, it doesn't feel aligned. A lot of it feels like posturing and dishonest. I don't enjoy this. And so I need to like come back to ground zero. And then like in the wake of that, it wasn't shortly after that COVID happened, quarantine happened, my whole travel DP schedule got killed. I have to go back to being like, okay, what am I going to do more locally? And I was like, well, I've had this like little DBA since I was 19. I should probably finally get an LLC, and like I should probably actually build a position, and I should take all these lessons that I've taken from bigger production and my experience and go build something else. And that's really where Challenger was born out of. And for me, it was that sense of like, the titles are silly, the bloat is silly. I would way rather have a team of 5 savages, and we can literally do more, looks better, sounds better, is better, pay people well, run more reasonable schedules, be a little more flexible. Because even like, again, there's a time and a place for the big traditional production game, but it's like so much stuff just gets silly because we're locked around 10-hour days, and it's like you can do a lot with actually a few shorter things, and like pulling more locations in and not being so worried about company moves and having this big bloated ship that you have to constantly steer. Having the people who are involved in the production actually be involved in the creative, because how many times did I get handed a deck that some fuckhead wrote who doesn't have any clue how anything happens, and you're like, this is impossible. Like the budget and the deck are irreconcilable, and now we get stuck holding the bill. And so like that was the thing that I stepped into, and it was a real existential crisis for me for like 3 years, honestly, because to the thing where people are like, what do you do? I'm like, I don't know anymore. I'm doing photography, I'm having client meetings, we're talking about business strategy and internal communication and training videos and billboards, and like I feel like I just like blossomed into this whole new world of conversations. And I was like, okay, I'm doing it, but I don't know what to say I'm doing anymore. And I still see other people sort of that I was adjacent to going off on the traditional path. And it's like just stepping through that and being like, I just want the work to speak for itself. I want to be in rooms where we're playing these games with people who care about the actual work we're doing. And I feel like this last year is where it started to feel like it's really clicking. And we're getting some of those relationships. We just did a thing for J&J last week. And after the shoot, there was like a meet and greet with a talent, and client was just talking, they were introducing me to other J&J people, but it was the thing, I feel like what you're saying, where they're like, oh, this is Evan, he's just a wizard, and like he's making everything work. And I was like, that's all I ever wanted. I don't need any title other than that. Like, I'm happy to be the facilitator in the funnel. I'm happy to set people up for success. I'm happy to make sure that there's creative clarity. I'm happy to help encourage clients' courage and creativity as they come into things. And like, cameras are great. We can execute. I can execute all day. But like, execution to me is so secondary to all of this, and to really creating the space and setting the table and going, how do we set an intention to make something beautiful and meaningful and funny or heartfelt or whatever it is in the world? And like, stepping into that space that I, for so long, didn't almost lost sight of existing because people told me it was impossible. And like, no, you have to play the game and you have to be in this label and whatever else. And then you step back and you're like, oh, this is so much better. Like I'm still, we're still figuring it out, but this is a totally different game. And it is a third thing. It's like, even I still don't totally know. I say that we're like doing hybrid business creative consulting work, because with a lot of clients, that's what we're doing too, is being more involved on the actual like business comms auditing side of things. But it's like we're doing different things with different people. We're building a team. We're making a lot of really fun stuff. And we're not getting too hung up on the labels, because at the end of the day, we want to like use creativity to bring inspiration and authenticity and honesty back into the world in an industry where I feel like it has gotten so manipulative and postury and ego driven wild that it's like, I don't know, man. Like I just am, to your point earlier, it's like, I would rather do nothing than do what I was doing 2 or 3 years ago. Like I'll go kick out to another industry. And that was the point for me where I was like, I'm either going to kick out to another industry or I'm going to go wholesale. So I'm going to go wholesale into this thing and see if we can make it work without the titles, without anything. And if we can't, I just go get a day job, because I'm over just like DPing. And it's been super cool. And one of the coolest things for me personally has been, one, getting that experience of like, not finally, because I had it early on in my career too, but like really earning client trust to the point where people are like, go do what you're going to do. Like, we don't want to stick our fingers in it. Like, you tell us what you need from us. We had a call today and they're like, don't want to micromanage it. Tell me what you need to give you guys direction, and then you run with the ball. And it's like, yes, like I worked for so many people who never fought for that position, and it hurt everyone below them on some level. And it's like, okay, that's so special. And then getting to actually play that role of like leading and facilitating, and being able to like come in, facilitate, teach people, point people in a direction, give people a shot, and see them hit home runs, and see the joy on themselves of getting to see a home run that they hit go out into the world. And like, that's the joy that I remember of like the first time I saw a billboard I had shot up in the wild. And it's like, oh yeah, that was magic. And then I hit the point where it was like, another thing I did that I hate is out on Instagram and has 1 million views, but who cares? And so like for me, getting to go like, let's help people put stuff out that they're actually really proud of, and seeing them light up and seeing them excited that they like got paid on time and didn't get nickel and dimed and like had clear creative direction. That's the stuff that lights me up right now. And like, I still have all the camera skills, right? Like I can direct and DP all day, but stepping into this new role for me, when you said like happier, not happier, but more whole, that's kind of how I feel about it too. It's like, I just feel like there's this whole piece of me. Because before I got into cameras, it was like I was a musician and I was an artist. I'd started as like a traditional artist, sucked at drawing, got Photoshop, got into design. And so now we've been expanding, and people are like, don't you think it's weird that you're like stepping outside of film? And I'm like, homies, this was what I did before film. Film, like cameras were the thing that took me on a 10-year journey to go learn about the world and make a bunch of money and meet a bunch of cool people. Now I came back to the starting point, and we get to go on another new loop and take all my friends and family and all the skills that didn't get to come the first time around. And like, that's exciting to me. I'm not going to go just run another lap of the same thing. Like, we're going to take all those lessons and bring a whole bunch of people on us this time. And that's what makes me excited to get out of bed these days.
Yeah, it's like trying to, it's like putting the same pieces on the board, expecting different results. Like, people do that day in, day out. And it's like, but then they look at us a little weird. Like, they're like, why are you doing something different? Like, and I'm like, no, this is what I've always done.
Right.
And I have always thought of this term that no one will ever actually use to describe anything, but like, my role has always felt like a facilitator of opportunity for myself and others. Like, that's it. Like, bar none. It just has happened with cameras. It's happened with these things because they were interesting, and I'm a curious person. And I told my friend Josh earlier while I was in here, I was like, I think people that try new things often, or even explore new things often, not just like scratch the surface, they're chasing that feeling of like your first billboard, right? Those first things, that serotonin of the first, because that's always going to feel better than your 10,000th hour, right? Like, the slog to excellence is a slog. There is the day in, day out, show up at the desk, the war of art, right? Like, sit at the empty page. There is that, like, knowing how to do the thing well. But it's like, I mean, you're a musician too. It's like the first time you learn like a chord progression, you're like, that feels so much better than like the 20th time performing that song. Mm-hmm. You know, like the first time you nail it, like there is something so great about that. And that's why like I'm super stoked to be going and doing something completely different and new, like in a new job, kicking out to something different. And also people looked at me a little crooked. They're like, but like, are you sure you want to do that? And I was like, this is actually what I want now. But like what I've done for the past 10 years was also what I wanted. What I want evolves and changes. And I think a lot of those wants are actually needs. Like, it's not actually like, it's not I just desire to do this. Like, no, I need to do this. And this is the functional way that that's going to get done. But yeah, no, I resonate with that. I kind of love confusing people, but I hope I only confuse the right people and not the wrong ones.
I feel
like,
that.
I still want people to trust. I want the client trust. I want the freedoms of people seeing and understanding me. And I think that's why like I do love titles, and I also have always envied people that are like just such a good DP. That like they're just
oh yeah, totally. So much respect
like,
for those people.
I know, like I think I carried a lot of envy for that for a lot of like before I gave myself permission to wander. And even the year of me saying I was a filmmaker, I only did that because I didn't feel like I was a director or a DP. I was just like, what's the weird thing that like still leaves it open-ended? And filmmaker was what I landed on, because you could be a commercial filmmaker, you could just add things to filmmaker either direction, and it made sense wherever you wanted to go.
Right.
But I've always said this, I think, and I know that this is such a luxury, but it's a luxury that came by way of a lot of hard work. Is like I got to work with my best friends every day, and it's like to your point, it's cameras, it's these things, but it was this. And also like if tomorrow it was picking up trash with my best friends and somehow paid our rent, dude, sign me up.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, I'm down. Like I really don't. I don't get the same buzz doing those things for the thing anymore. I do it for the experience, for the people, for the exposure. And I think something I've been exploring a lot is having an opinion versus having perspective. I think I spent my 20s having a lot of opinions, and which is just like opinions are talking about things you haven't experienced, having a take on it. And then perspective is actually having gone there and come back and saying like, no, I believe this now. And I think a lot of people that understand me are people that have perspective. There's a resonance because they've gone somewhere and come back. And people that I do not vibe with at all, and most definitely do not understand me, are people with a lot of opinions. And I usually use that as kind of my red flag when I meet people. And I know it's one thing to be like, oh, they're really opinionated. I'm like, no, but are they just having a hot take for a take's sake? Like,
right.
What's the reason? Like, do they actually want to understand something? Or like, have they ever been wrong? Yeah. Like, I want to go down the list of things I've been wrong about in my life. Like it's long and it's fun and it's painful, but man, that's actually what makes a person.
And that's it for this week's episode of Second Order Change. I'm so grateful for this time with Colton, and grateful to you for making it all the way through. I know that was a long one. You can find Colton and myself on Instagram, and you can also find the link to book that free discovery call with Core Group in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast, or in the description of the video if you are watching on YouTube. We're going to be back next week with an episode with Mario Fabri, who is an incredible filmmaker and chef. He talks about his dream of becoming an astronaut, basketball player, etc. How his high school guidance counselor told him he should probably level set and just become an actuary. His journey to go to college to become an actuary, which led to him figuring out how to get people in-state tuition and starting a whole company, dropping out of college. And then that getting shut down, him going to become a filmmaker just so he could learn and figure out what his path forward would be. And now living the life of his dreams as a food-focused, health-focused, mission-focused content creator. It's an incredible conversation, and we're going to give you a quick teaser of that. But we're going to see you back here next week on Second Order Change.
I couldn't afford to go to school. I was surrounded by people that couldn't afford to go to school, but thought it was normal to take out $45,000 student loans. I need to raise my prices, and I'm like cringing at sending it, and I like triple the price. They're like, oh, fine, thumbs up.
Yeah.
Like, I probably could have been charging that in the first place. One of my first clients paid me $500 to do a job that today should be $10,000. They went from $500 to offering me a $200,000 salary to move to New York City and build a kitchen studio of my dreams.